Alright, well, it's 11. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming into Garland this morning. My name's Mitch, and I'll be running you through our little veggie course we have. Sort of an intro and a little bit of extra details as well about, timing of things, getting your spring started on the right foot, and growing through the year to have a wonderful harvest. Thank you all for coming in again. Like I said, I hope I can offer enough information to help your gardens out this year. And if you have any questions throughout, feel free just to raise your hand, let me know. Or at the end, we can go over discussion type topics as well. So one of the things I like to start with is just understanding why, lots of people grow gardens. Some people do it just from a therapeutic standpoint. But since what we're talking about today is vegetables, we all want to eat what we grow. And for me, one of the biggest things that's brought me to loving vegetables and being able to talk about them endlessly, it feels, is that I love supplementing my grocery list in my garden. It's one of the most satisfying things I've found from gardening in general. Being able to grow the things you can get in the grocery store. That's some ways to approach growing vegetables is just that. Other ways are to try and find things that you can't grow or that you can't get in the grocery store and grow those so you can widen your palette, so to speak. I personally like to focus on the things that I can get, and more importantly, the things that I'm going to eat, things that are always a constant part of my diet. So those are big aspects that, to think about when you're moving into planting a vegetable garden. A couple of the things that come to mind for me is to, help define what you want out of it. If it's just some extra veggies here and there, that's great. If it's you really want to make your whole summer, grocery free, if you will, from the grocery store, then that's another way to go about it. Understanding your desires in the beginning of the season will help, paint the picture on how to go about planning and planting your garden and caring for it through the season. Because it's very satisfying nonetheless. Vegetables and in the past have always been things that are very cheap in the grocery store, but as times are getting tougher, the prices of everything is going up. So being able to sustain yourself at home and create that food security at home is something that's really cool. I love to share what I know about it. A few of the vegetables I'll show you today, I have various reasons why I love to grow them. And so I'll kind of just start with some of our taller growing vegetables. Here I have a Kentucky Wonder pole bean, as well as shelling and sugar snap peas. These are two things that we would trellis growing up, buying sort of an arbor, if you will. And they're an awesome vegetable selection because their height growing up a trellis can provide shade for things that need a little bit more shade through the summer months. That being things such as some of your herbs, like cilantro and parsley especially, they're known to bolt in our hot summers, which means they shoot up a seed stalk and actually become rather bitter instead of the flavors that we're after. So one of the ways that you can prevent that is providing them with some shade. So being able to combine planting things that provide shade for things that need shade is a really fun aspect of incorporating the design of your garden and the locations of where you plant things. To create the best kind of shade, you'd want to have your trellising items be on your most west-facing aspect of your garden, so the evening sun is hitting these sun-loving vegetables and shading out these moderate sun lovers that prefer the afternoon to be cooler, whereas the afternoons here in Oregon are extremely warm and later into the day than most areas of the country. Actually, the peak of our temperatures typically go between 4:30 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, whereas most of the country is, their temperatures are decreasing in the middle of the afternoon rather than late. So these type of plantings on the west side, when the sun is at its hottest, really help balance the temperatures within your garden. Extending your season for these cooler veggie crops, things like lettuces and spinaches, they all like a little bit cooler of a climate to be really successful. So to be able to continue them into the spring, being able to incorporate something that helps you out in that sense. Another great option, I didn't bring them down here, but is tomatoes. They typically grow tall enough to create a good amount of shade for another crop. So just things to incorporate while you're thinking about planning. There's a lot of things to incorporate based on the space you're dealing with as well. Not everyone has unlimited space. If you're in a fine amount of space, understanding incorporating what you want the most out of it is one of the best ways to have your planning go right so that the summer months are successful in your harvest. Thanks for coming in. You just want to pamphlet, a handout here? Sure. Sorry. No sweat. It's just a calendar to kind of give you a rough idea of planting times for things, and we're just going over some of that. Yeah, so this is just incorporating taller vegetables with shorter, cooler season vegetables to be able to grow them later into the season. Provide that afternoon shade so that these ideally don't grow to seed. Once a vegetable grows to seed, even though lettuce leaves, for example, may seem like they're still really great, as the seed forms, they become more bitter. So it becomes much less desirable. If you can provide it enough shade to prevent it from going to seed, then you'll continue to have your vegetables be their true flavor, more often sweet. I've got a couple of butter crunches up here. These are always really sweet lettuces. I love that. Makes eating salads with a mixture like that a lot more fun. You can pack it full of flavor, different levels of it as well. And then we'll get into these are more of our long season crops. And then, so the main ones I like to focus on are our superfoods, our brassicas. We've got Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, and broccoli are the three main ones that I grow the most of and have a blast growing it. The one catch here is this is the #1 crop for aphids. So it's important to understand that despite growing foods, we will have pests. Some of the best organic food out there has pests in it because it's organic. And so when you're dealing with food crops, it's important to incorporate understanding the dynamics of using organic sprays and fungicides and things like that, because these are end products you're consuming, so you don't want to go down the route of nastier chemicals that, yeah, you did kill your bug, but also you're going to eat that? So we want to encourage people to do as much as they can organically with vegetable crops and gardening for any food purposes. And despite them being ridden with aphids, there's many different ways, post-harvest even, to do quick vinegar soaks will float out all of the bugs, and then you can re-rinse your vegetables and use them just as you normally would. Other ways, we have organic insecticidal soaps, when used in a regular basis, really combat the entry of these bugs. They create sort of a film along the surface of our leaves, which helps resist against the penetration of the bugs into the leaf surface, which is eventually what degrades the quality and or eventual harvest of your crops. Broccoli and a lot of these brassicas are sun-loving. They really want to be out in the open getting hot. The catch to that is, as a result, they have a natural form of wilting every day to help them survive through the hottest times of the day. They're sort of a heart-wrenching crop as a result, because almost every day in the heat of the season it'll feel like you're losing your broccoli. But when in fact it's a good chance that you're doing pretty well with it. The catch to that also is, once you start to see things like the head of the broccoli, it gets to a harvestable point and your window to harvest it is limited, because it will then also go to seed. It flowers first. It's a gorgeous flower. If you let it go to that point, I always like to leave them for the pollinators. Helps get the rest of your garden a little more action as well. And if you don't harvest them, don't worry about it. Gardening can still be fun for the flowers. It's important to know that what you put in is what you can get out of it. If you want to have a low maintenance garden, don't be too disappointed if your harvests aren't too stellar. If you want to put a lot into it, it's surprising what you'll get out of it. I started gardening in a 4x4 raised bed and apartment that they allowed me to put it out front of, and a method called square foot gardening, and graduated it from there into now my fiance and I, we grow roughly a half an acre of vegetables every year, and then donate as much extras as we can to the local food banks, which is also something that a lot of homeowners can do. It's surprising the different vegetables that you can grow more than you can eat, in a very small amount of space, and it just adds another element of fun to it all. I'm a big proponent about incorporating fun into this and being able to reap the benefit via harvesting vegetables and eating them is second to none for me, at least. And then supplementing that grocery bill in the garden is absolutely wonderful. It's very fulfilling. It's definitely a labor of love. You know, if you tried to pencil out how much your cucumber you grew at home cost, it's probably more than the one at the grocery store. If you calculate your time and efforts into it, but the satisfaction is there that you don't get by just picking out one at the grocery store. And so these are some of our longer season crops. Broccoli typically takes well over 100 days to go full maturity. Great to get in the ground started now. Crops that take a longer time, this is also a cold hardy one. You want to get them in as soon as possible. The other end of that is short crops you want to get in as soon as possible. We're coming up on basically our last frost concerns are in the next week or so. It's looking pretty good on the forecast, but we always say don't hold your breath until Mother's Day is sort of our typical cutoff as to, like, it's pretty good chance we won't experience any more frost beyond that. And so now is a really great time. There's many crops, all of these lettuces, these brassicas, broccolis, cauliflowers, Brussels sprouts, they can all handle the cold weather and can go in now. Really great time to start. Lettuces are a short enough crop that you'll be harvesting within 30 days when you have starts like this. Incorporating mixtures can help, you know, add some texture and color elements to salads and whatever have you that you might want to make with them. Getting your pole beans and your peas in early so that you have that shade structure established as your other plants are growing and you get into the hot season. That's when you really want that shade to be helping you out. If you're in an area that you can't, you know, have that kind of focus or shifting of your crop locations, you know, it's important to be able to think, okay, well, maybe I can shift my focus into arranging it a little bit differently. We've got things like shade cloth. If you can't put your trellised items on the west side, but you still want shade, you know, small hoop structures with a shade over top of it will extend your season on the cooler vegetable crops by quite a bit. It's always a little bit disheartening in the middle of July and August. Lettuce is hard to grow because it wilts down in the heat, and or if it's got enough water, it will do the bolting. You can add some shade before that happens, and then it'll delay that process, give you a little bit longer harvesting time. And then throughout all of these plantings, one of the things we can incorporate for your extended harvests are succession planting, which basically involves saying, hey, I'm going to dedicate a certain percentage of my garden to planting this week. And then in 10 days, which you kind of equate your planting times on how long it would take you to eat this amount of food that you planted. You know, it's a rough guess. You do your best, you know. Otherwise, you can end up planting everything all at once, and you harvest them all at once, and you go, oh my gosh, I have more green beans, tomatoes, and everything than I could ever imagine, all at once. And that can be a little overwhelming. So doing succession planting can give you a better idea, or better chance at stretching your harvests, being more practical with what you're eating, in addition to how you're growing it. One of the best ways to do that is to assess how much lettuce would I eat in a week. If it's not 6 full heads of lettuce, you probably don't need to plant more than that in a week. And then wait several weeks before planting the next batch, because they mature in a days of time. It's not a matter of they're all ready in July, for example. Lettuces, for the most part, are a 2-month crop on average. And so you can kind of equate that out from you start today and you'll have a great crop in June. You start in 1st of May and you'll have a great crop 1st of July, and it kind of goes from there. A lot of these vegetables I have on the lists here for you will give you the time frame to harvest. A lot of those are from seed to harvest, and then some of them are from start to harvest. That's why I have the 2 different lists, kind of give you a little bit of a variation between them both. It's always good to have a little extra info, I figure. Kind of help lead you down the right path. And again, you know, we're getting into we're just about to a point where we can green light plant everything. But going back to arranging your garden on, we have short crops that are going to fill, once they're done, we've got empty space in our garden and we can fill back in with ideally more short crops that will be done before the end of the season. While also being able to dedicate space to our longer season crops, which are things like our squashes and winter squashes especially. It's something you grow all summer long and into the fall to then be able to have and store through the winter. That's the whole concept of the winter squash, is that it's harvested for the winter eating. It's kind of a weird name in that sense because it's not actually grown during the winter. And then we have our summer squash too, which is your classic crooknecks and zucchinis. It's a thing where in July, if you leave your window down, you'll end up with one in the front seat. People are always trying to get rid of their zucchinis. It's an oddly satisfying thing to grow because of how relatively easy, if they're watered well. They come into bloom really quickly. They're short between getting pollinated to when they're ready to harvest. There's usually one you don't see, and then you end up with a baseball bat. And I always think it's kind of fun. They're usually only good for things like pies and breads after that. But there's always one that gets by you. I make my every effort to harvest them about the size of a cucumber. But again, the leaves are so big, they cover themselves up pretty well. But a really fun crop to go throughout all the summer. And then some other things I like to incorporate, not so much in the veggie world, but are things like cilantro and dill, because they're two items that I cook with a lot, and then the dill I preserve with a lot. So it's really great if you end up doing pickling. If you don't grow the other aspects of what you use to pickle, you're buying all of your pickling. Salts is the one thing I can't grow, but you're buying all of your dill, you're buying all of your garlic, this and that. If you can grow it all, it makes that whole canning, preserving process that much more fun. Very cool. It makes eating through the winter really fun as well, because having something you spend all summer doing and a fall preserving and getting to eat it in December and January when most crops are pretty much dead aside from the occasional overwintering things, is something that I love to incorporate every year. My goal with gardening, where I do, I have, like I said, almost a half an acre, is to sustain until the next growing season, and we're just getting ready to harvest onions, and we ate our last onion last night. So we're just about there to that point, and so that's just the approach that I have. A lot of people just want to be able to go out and have a fresh snack. What I started with before all of y'all showed up is important to understand, what your goals about gardening are, what you want out of it, so you know what to put into it. And so a couple of the things I like to bring up for success are things like these. These are two mycorrhiza fertilizer products that help to incorporate and expand the usable nutrients within your soil. So if you have a questionable soil, or you don't feel like you've been able to add enough amendments or compost to it, this is a really great way to supplement getting nutrients to your plants, because they do need it. It's really easy to think you can just plant them and water them and be good with it, but they do need some care beyond that, and some of that goes involved. These are so user friendly that they, you can't overdo it. They release on their own timing. The plant uptakes what it needs. It doesn't luxury consume like other nutrients. The way that they're available, a plant will uptake everything and kind of overgrow itself, potentially not even fruit or produce its crop as a result. And so these are so user friendly that we support this company wholeheartedly. We actually have a sale going on the Biotone 8-pound bag today. It's $5 off. And the rep is here today to talk about some of our other products if you're interested in getting some more targeted towards landscape plants as well. These are so wonderful to use. It's the way that we can give people the confidence to know that if you start with these and you're watering on a daily basis throughout the year or a consistent basis, these are your recipes for success. And another one is, we have it here. This is my favorite compost, is the Land and Sea. It's an organic blend, again from Espoma. It's the same company. We have our rep up here today. This is a great thing to continue to add to soils that you're not sure about, or if you're stuck with clay, things that don't drain well. If you're continuing to add organic matter in the form of composts, mulches, those type of things will always add to the health of your garden. The overall health of your soil, which composts and incorporations like mulches and such will increase your soil health. Soil health increases your vegetable health. And so all of these things combined with the effort, and then watering is the next step, so to speak. It's important to understand vegetables are a high demand watering crop on average. During the most of June, July, and August, they need daily watering. And so incorporating some sort of a dripper system, soaker hoses is one of our preferred methods. We sell them here. In addition to timers, keeping it simple, you know, planting your rows in a line, and then your soaker hose can go down the next line, so it's very easy for the water to distribute exactly where you want it. It helps not have as many weeds growing where you don't want them as well. If all your water is focused where your crops are, those will be what grows the best. Minimizing your weeding needs, and opening up the opportunity to not be tied to your garden all summer. That's the one thing that I struggled with early on before I started to do drip irrigation and soaker hoses with timers. Was I couldn't leave for more than 2 days without thinking my entire 2 months of work to get my garden to this point was going to go by the wayside. And if we have any kind of summer like last year, you all know you can only water so much to a degree. Having things like the soaker hoses and timers helping you out, one of your best recipes for success. Your 3-day weekends, your week-long vacations, they can be overcome for a few extra dollars in supplies to make your garden work well. That's more or less the gist of my spiel, and I'd love to just have any conversations about questions, concerns, and I'll do what I can to answer for you.
Do you recommend a certain kind of timer?
You know, I've had very many over the years. The biggest thing I can say is try and have it lifted off the ground, even if it's just on a brick or something like that, because the biggest time you see malfunctions, brand aside, is when they end up sitting in the grass too long, or end up in a puddle, or there's you know, the rubber gasket has started to leak a little and you don't address it. Those are the only things I've seen where you start to have issues. I've never really run into a specific brand that's better than the other, especially because, I mean, you could go from a $12 timer all the way up to thousands. So there's such a wide range of how to go about it. The simpler the better, in my opinion. There's lots of these what we call inline timers. Comes out of the faucet and just has one spot for a hose to come out of. Those to me are the most simple. It's just set it for how many days a week do you want it, how long do you want it, and you know, you get into your peak growing season and you want it every day for now half an hour to an hour, especially with those soaker hoses. But the cool thing is they're still only watering that area that you want. And so, yeah, it's important to know those aspects of how to plan.
What would you recommend for like I have raised garden beds?
Yeah.
I do a lot of container gardening. So the soaker hoses are great for like planting in a row. But if I like have the 4 square kind of method going on,
Yeah.
or the square foot gardening, how would you get the soaker hose in there with all the different?
So with soaker hose in particular, just because it's more conducive to either being a straight line or looped, what I've done is it takes a little bit extra hose, but I've strung them together and I've made a loop in each square, for example, around the plant that I'm after. So if it's a broccoli plant, I'm going to do a loop around it so that core root zone is getting the water. And then again in the next spot. You know, it requires probably 20 or 30 extra feet than you're normally used to. But the soaker hose to me is just the most user-friendly. We don't even sell the more complicated drip systems because they require pressure reducers and you know, a certain level to begin with. Whereas the soaker hoses are pretty self-regulated. If they have too much pressure, they just leak more water out. So it's pretty. I like the simplicity of it. You know, it's early on in falling in love with gardening. It's important to keep it simple, or you'll find yourself not falling in love with gardening. And I like to encourage that. So the things like that that are, you know, a little bit extra length on the hose, still incorporate your style. But you know, the other end is you can go to places like Wilco and elsewhere. They have drip system emitters, and the catch to it is, and I don't even know a lot of it is like I said, there's pressure regulation so that, you know, the sprinkler or the dripper that's 100 feet down the line still drips. Whereas that I don't know completely, and that's where the soaker hose is just going to be really user friendly. I have seen people cut them up and put them into grid forms, you know, with elbows and hose clamps and stuff. It's a little bit of effort, but it's also kind of the grid forms of these dripping and watering systems are pretty cool. I know there's a 4x4 grid like kit that they sell online, I'm not sure where, but they're out there, especially for the container style gardening, you know, just to be simple and already in a grid for you. Helps make the spacing really easy. Like, well, if it's going to water right here, I should plant right here, rather than planting and then trying to weave everything into it can be somewhat difficult also. Yeah.
Good question. When do you recommend watering in the summertime? In the morning or in the evening?
Both, or either or both. Middle of the day is a no-no. The knee-jerk reaction in the peak of summer and hot days is it's 4 o'clock, plants look like, you know, they look bad, I need to water now. And in fact, that may cool the plants down, but they will not actually drink. When they start to wilt, they will not imbibe water. That's why they're wilting. It's a defense mechanism, a physiological reaction to the heat of the day so that they can survive. By the evening, you'll see those same plants perk back up as the temperatures drop. As the temperatures drop, your humidity will rise a little bit. Even in the peak of the summer, it'll rise enough to re-energize those leaves, if you will, and then they will begin to uptake water again. So it's important that when you're doing your watering, you're in a moment where it is going to do that. So late evening, you know, basically after 8 o'clock almost, once your sun has really gone down in the horizon, or before 7 a.m. And part of that too is, depending on where you are, water can be cheaper before 7 a.m. too. And power to pump water, if you're on a well like I am, is cheaper before 7 a.m. So I try and do things like that, somewhat based around that, but also plants will uptake their water the best. I do mornings because I feel it gives it the best chance to make it that length of time to the next day. But really just trying to stay consistent once you've picked one. If for your schedule you don't have a timer yet, doing it in the evenings is better, stick with that. Keep it consistent. You know, you get into the hotter months and we start to do more reaction watering, and that's where the timer can be more like, well, I know it's getting 15 minutes in the morning, so I don't have to panic when I get off work. I can just go walk around my garden and see if a couple things need it. Again, I always touch back to the timers and the soaker hoses because they're your best friend to keep it simple and not have those freakouts when you get home like, I've spent so much time and need to water. When we all have so much going on in the summers, it's gardening should not be the burden.
Should we steer away from getting leaves wet on all vegetables?
In general, aside from lettuces, everything will do a little bit better if it's getting watered from underneath the foliage. That's again where these drippers and soaker hoses can play a big benefit to you. Watering foliage promotes potential powdery mildews. All the molds and mildews in the air can come onto it, land. The water's given them a food source to thrive with. Whereas if we're watering just the soil and the leaves are only having their dew moisture from, you know, basically breathing all night, they end up with dew all over them. That's the amount of natural moisture that's a great like ebb and flow of wetting and drying. But us doing it is not advised if we can avoid it. Basically because number one, like these will be the first ones to show it, are your squashes. They'll have powdery mildew even in the middle of the summer. When it seems like, how is there enough moisture for there to be? Well, if I've watered over top, there's a chance of that. You know, we're at a bit of a disadvantage having so much plant material here. We have to have sprinklers go at night and things like that. But in a garden environment, it's ideal if you can do it from a drip or underneath the foliage. The areas that I don't have on drip, I have a wand that I'm always trying to get down to the base, just to be sure.
If inadvertently you do end up getting the leaves, I know cucumbers just don't do well at all.
They're not a big fan of it, that's
What
for
about
sure.
like tomatoes?
Tomatoes, not a big fan either.
Okay.
And part of that too is once you start fruiting, any water that gets onto your fruit can cause splitting. And then just everything becomes that much more undesirable. So tomatoes are like the number one crop you don't want to do that to for your harvest sake more than anything. The leaves, the foliage might not mind so much. They are a little bit powdery mildew susceptible, but the fruit, because tomato actually is a fruit, is the bigger concern with that aspect. Early on in the season, while it still just blossoms, not the end of the world, but it's not something you want to promote. If you can have an alternative, you want to try and go that way. Even big farms with these huge pivot irrigation systems, they're now starting to have drop drip systems on it. So instead of a sprinkler going around this big field, there's a drip line that slowly drags through the field and drip, 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 drips as it grows. Because they're even realizing, okay, we need to increase the overall health of the plants, minimize water loss, which is another thing you get through classic sprinkler systems, is wind loss. You're not watering all just your root zone of your desirable vegetables. You're watering your pathways where your weeds can end up coming up, and spending so much time weeding can be a bummer when some of it can be alleviated by watering just in your ideal areas.
What about slugs?
Slugs?
Slugs.
Slugs. They're
Good luck my legs.
They definitely will. There's a lot of different ways to combat slugs. One of the basic ones is to buy the Sluggo. It's a wonderful bait. It does a great job. Get a perimeter around it. There's an organic version of it as well. Safe for your garden, safe for your pets, and will do a good job of alleviating. And I say alleviating. Nothing will eliminate slugs. 9 out of 10 slug species are invasive. So at some point, I wouldn't be surprised if slugs become one of those number one pests in gardening. Fortunately, there's a lot of great ways we can take care of them. If you have a raised bed, for example, we sell a copper tape. If you surround the bed in copper tape, it's a weird thing, but there's a frequency that when they try and go across it, they can't. It creates a mental block for them, more or less. And then there's other methods of around your plants. If you eat eggs, save your egg shells, dry them out, break them up, sprinkle them around the base of all your plants, and then the slugs don't have a point of entry at that point. The eggshells broken up will cut up their bellies and they sort of ooze to death as a result. And so they'll basically steer clear. As soon as they hit one eggshell, they'll move around. And the cool thing with that one is if you see that, you'll see the slug trail make a turn. Because they didn't want to die that day. And then, again, like I said, we had Sluggo as well, but then there's other methods of a shallow cup with beer in it. You go buy the cheapest beer you can get. It just has to have something with a little bit of sugar and hops in it, and they'll be attracted to it, and then they drown it. And every morning you'll see your cup will be full of slugs. And then other methods are to put wood boards out in your garden. They're attracted to the moisture on the underside of the wood, and then in the early morning you can go out, grab the wood, and knock them off in the garbage can or your yard debris and whatnot. It's all just ways to reduce them. You'll never eliminate them. But yeah, the eggshell method. We also sell another product that's called diatomaceous earth. It's very good for your soil's health, as well as it has a similar mechanism of cutting up the stomachs of slugs and snails. Those are two things, though, that will decimate some crops, and it's really nice to be able to get them under wraps early.
What about like little? I've noticed like on I started my lettuce with seeds and everything. Lots of little bugs running over getting in them, and
Like flying bugs.
yeah. I go out in the morning and there's like little leaves like they've been pushed off.
Are you seeing the bug on it? Because that sounds like slug damage, actually.
Oh, that probably
Yeah.
is it then.
Yep,
I haven't
almost
seen any
certainly.
bugs on it, and I'm like,
So
"Ooh,
I
yeah."
even this spring had an entire flat of lettuce kind of getting mowed down in one night by a couple of slugs. Yeah, and that's all it takes. They're one of the best lumberjacks in the vegetable world. And small little note, for their size, they have the sharpest teeth in the world.
Ooh. I didn't know there were teeth.
Yeah.
I'm totally new to gardening,
Yeah.
vegetable gardening. But my daughter, from her employer, they've given her a 10 by 20 plot.
Nice.
Things in.
It's a wonderful.
Some things I know I can start with seeds, but other things I don't know if it might be better to buy the transplant. Can you give me an idea of what things I should get transplants of so I get more bang for my buck?
Longer crops. So any of those that say anything beyond 90 days to harvest, those are typically much better to get a start of, because then the wholesaler and us have taken 4 weeks of that time for you. And now you can start on week 5, so to speak, and then you're not as far out. So the longer crops are something that I always encourage people to buy starts of. Shorter crops are shorter because they grow from seed to harvest much quicker, making them easier to grow from seed. A lot of those type of things like radishes and that's the number one, probably the fastest to harvest crop. We almost never have starts of them because they're so fast that we would have them in a 6-pack like this ready to harvest, basically, if we sold starts, because it's, from starting your seed to harvesting a radish at a desirable size can be like 40 days sometimes. And so that's one, if you like radishes, it's super satisfying how fast you can grow them. And then also, on the small side note, if you're really just getting going, to be encouraged into continuing to garden, starts are a really wonderful way. A few bucks, $5-6 for 6-7 plants, or a lot of times these beans, for example, 2 or 3 in each cell, is a minimal cost versus, I only had to pay $2 for the seed, and then I had to buy the trays, and then I had to buy the soil, and then, so, it's just a different approach. However, germinating seeds is a very satisfying aspect. Again, kind of coming back to, why do I want to garden? And that can change every year. First year, I want to figure out how I can grow broccoli, because I buy 5 crowns of it a week if I don't grow it. And the other end of it could be, I just want to have green things to care for all year long. Vegetables are a wonderful one that you can reap a second benefit from all year.
I love that. That's 2 questions. Actually. The first one, I started my tomatoes from seed inside.
Okay.
And I used those cardboardy little, I didn't use plugs this year. I decided to do those little cardboard. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they're like a fiber type of pot.
Not a fiber, more of a paperish.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
They're like a compostable pot.
Yes,
more or less.
exactly. Because
Yeah.
I just replanted them yesterday
Uh-huh.
into a bigger pot. And then I used just regular potting mix to start the seed, and I have a grow light and all of that. And I put them in a tray, and these minute little orange, like maybe lichen, started growing on the sides of the pots, and then also maybe into the pot, but not into the soil so much. But that sounds. I was wondering, is that harmful or?
Not likely harmful unless you've seen some degradation in the growth of the tomato. But if the tomato's still growing well, I wouldn't see of it as a negative. The one thing is, are those used pots?
No.
They're brand new.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I would think that could be a result of like a used pot getting, not properly cleaned out years after years. But if it's a fresh pot, that's something I haven't quite seen. Could be due to the soil you use potentially. Occasionally you get a bagged potting soil here or there that's got a funkiness to it. It may have sat here or there for a little too long. But if your tomato's growing well, I wouldn't be too concerned about it.
Okay.
And once you get your final transplanting, if it's still growing well, you know, you could always scratch the surface of the soil around it to see if it then regrows back. That would indicate it's more systemic, or if you're able to kill it by just scratching it out, that's a
Some
way to.
fungus is good, right?
Yeah,
If you
yeah,
want it-
definitely. Some fungus is good, and in fact, these two things will promote really beneficial fungus that expands your root zone basically by creating a symbiotic relationship. Hey, roots, I got some nutrients over here you can use, and you can't get there yet. I'll feed you. That's what this stuff's really great for. It's capable of expanding. Say a traditional root zone was this big on a piece of broccoli or something, or a plant of broccoli. If you add mycorrhiza through these biotones and garden tone, it makes your root zone seem like it's this big. Even though physical roots are still only here, it's the symbiotic relationship with the fungus, the mycelium, that can help with that. It also makes nutrients that's not usually available to plants available, because the fungus can uptake more forms of those nutrients.
Okay. My other question is on your chart.
Mm-hmm.
The polka dots, what does that mean?
Oh, there's a little key at the end there. It shows like ideal time for planting indoors and then putting outdoor as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions?
What would you recommend for? Because I'm trying to do some containers as well, because my backyard is very tiny. So I'm just trying to make use of my space. What do you think grows well in, smaller containers? That's worth my while, because those would probably be watered by myself.
Cherry tomatoes.
Okay.
Just because if you have at least a decent enough size pot and you're watering every day, they can grow in a container well. There's something that will grow tall and be an abundant harvest.
Okay.
And so that's also something I try and think about with something you're growing in a small container. If it's only a head of lettuce, that doesn't do a lot for you, and it still takes 2 months. But if it's tomatoes, start harvesting in July and you're harvesting through September, that offers you a lot more, and especially in a small amount of space.
What about peppers, like jalapeno peppers? Or
so those are
like that?
they'll grow really well in a container, actually, because the root zone will heat up every day by the sun hitting the pot. And peppers especially, they still need water, but they love it hot. So if you have a small hoop house or greenhouse at home, put your peppers in there, and give them enough water, and they will do great. Peppers love the heat. What's that?
What about cucumbers in a small container?
Cucumbers, that's one that's a little different because it's a spreading plant,
Okay.
So the core root zone and everything is in one area, and then the vines go out. If you were to do cucumbers in a container, I would suggest doing a vertical trellising method, which pulls all the cucumbers off the ground. They're not dirty as a result too. Can be really fun. Cucumbers are a great one to grow vertically. You can, instead of needing that horizontal space, you can grow them up a trellis. Some melons even do that, but if you do melons, it's important to get, like, we have the sugar cube and the baby red variety of watermelon and cantaloupes, and they're about the size of a softball. Those are more suitable for a trellising method of growing melons. And melons are another thing that love it to be hot. And so the container part is not the worst problem. It's the biggest issue with all container growing is trying to make sure you keep them warm.
Going on with that.
Yeah.
So a container can't kill. I mean, I'm thinking about keeping the container warm, and then you've got hot, like those like we had last year.
Yeah.
Can you get it too hot?
If it's like last year, yeah, things can get too hot. If you have black pots, they can get too hot.
Yeah.
Ceramic pots do a better job of absorbing and cooling at an even rate, whereas plastic will spike in the heat of the afternoon, and especially black plastic. It's part of the reason we have such a battle of watering in the middle of the summer is because we've got all our pots in black plastic, our plants in black plastic. But that's the nature of how we have to get plants to customers to then be able to put them in the ground. But again, you know, if you're staying on your watering is a method of cooling down. So if you do some container watering, that's where watering in the heat of the day isn't crazy, because even though the plant may not be using it, you're creating the environment you want for that time of day. Cool my pot down a little bit. So it's an option for it, at least. Yeah. It's really cool when people can incorporate patio aspects to being able to garden, because really we don't all have an acre like I do, and can still get the enjoyment out of it. You know, the wholesalers and breeders have done a really great job with finding different varieties and honing them into being able to grow in smaller environments. We've got berries that are designed to grow in a container and stay this big and this wide and still get raspberries and blackberries, with, you know, minimal square feet outside your slider door, you know, or even I see people well, I've got 1.5 feet next to where I park. Line it with pots. You know, it's sort of user's choice, if you will, on how you want to go about it, but it does create a lot of opportunity for the smaller spaces as well.
When would you use garden tone versus biotone starting?
Garden tone is one I encourage with all vegetable plantings in general, whereas biotone is more of an all-purpose. Anything you want to plant, biotone is your better option, because it's more compatible with annuals, perennials, trees, and shrubs. Garden tone is more specifically targeted towards your annual vegetable crops.
Sorry.
Just one more. No, I'm teasing.
Oh, I got a million. Parsley. You know what, I remember, well, and cilantro too. Back east, I lived in a really cold climate. And I had cilantro that wintered over. Here, I can't get it to winter over, and same with parsley. And I thought I had a perfectly beautiful big parsley plant last year, and it's gone.
So, parsley is one I've had better luck with. Cilantro, I've only had luck with in my greenhouse. And I've actually only had luck with cilantro from September till May. And then my season for cilantro is done.
Okay.
That being said, the peak season, you know, if you want to grow them outside with your average vegetable crop, for both of those would be plant them now and you'll be done by June. Basically from June through August, parsley and cilantro are virtually impossible to grow without them bolting, becoming bitter. However, because they bolted and have become bitter, they're now establishing nutrient storage for going into a next season. So you can leave them, cut them back, and they should grow back the next year. But they're more of a biennial, not necessarily a full perennial. So they'll grow like 2 seasons and then kind of keel off. But then the other end of like cilantro, for example, is don't fret when it goes to seed, because that's how you get coriander.